Hi everybody, I'm Laura Clark and I'm going to be sharing with you today some evidence-based strategies that you can use to support appropriate behaviors in your classroom. This overview presentation will give you lots of great ideas, and if you'd like to dive deeper into these topics, there are several other trainings that you can find on our NKCES website. If you'd like to follow along or download your own copy of the slides, then please use the bit.ly link that's at the bottom of this slide. So our focus in this presentation is to focus on those effective and efficient low-intensity strategies that we can use to support student success, increase appropriate behaviors, and decrease those acting out behaviors in general education and resource settings. The strategies that we're looking at all came from these two issues of journals from the Council for Exceptional Children's Behavior Division, specifically Beyond Behaviors December 2018 issue and Behavioral Disorders February 2019 issue. If you aren't familiar with CEC or the behavior division called CCBD, I'd highly recommend that you check them out. There are links at the bottom of the slide. These two organizations really focus on supporting students with disabilities and on our national premier organization to support students with disabilities. As we move through this presentation, there's going to be a resource document that's a Google Doc that I'll be sharing. And if you'd like to access that Google Doc, the bit.ly link right here will take you to that document. So as we begin to dive into some specific interventions, one of the first concepts that we always need to make sure we're doing is that we're choosing wisely. Because while I'm presenting evidence-based practices that in general support students with disabilities, you will want to look deeper into the literature to look at what specific populations of students and what specific settings were used for that specific research. So for example, if I am in a middle school classroom in a rural environment and it's a self-contained classroom, and I want to use a strategy, I want to make sure that that wasn't a strategy where the research is all in preschool in urban or city settings. So make sure that those strategies match your audience and that you are looking at where the research came. We are under federal and state law that require us to use evidence-based practices to support students with disabilities, both from the general education side of the law, which right now is ESSA, and the special education federal law, which is IDEA. So when we're looking at those evidence-based practices, the practices that I'm going to be sharing are kind of grouped together. The first group of strategies really focus on helping us create structure and predictability. And the resource guide that I set up for everybody has the practice on the left-hand side. There's room, if you download the Google Doc, that you can add some additional resources after the description. And then the third column talks about what outcomes you should expect if you implement this strategy in the way in which it was laid out in the literature. So the first really important structure that we should set up to ensure that our students have the predictability that they need to be successful is looking at your physical environment. So is your classroom laid out in a way that matches the instructional intent? For example, if I'm doing a lot of partner work, are my desks situated that the partners can face each other and do work? Have I minimized the clutter and distractions in my classroom so that students can easily focus on the work at hand? And do they know where to access the materials they need to be successful in that activity? If I set up my physical environment in a way that meets those criteria, then hopefully I will have smoother outcomes and smoother instructional routines, which will increase the safety in my classroom and decrease disruptions from our instructional routine, which flows into our next practice of looking at our routines. And not just the classroom routines that we've set up, but also our lesson routines and the routines we initiate for interactions with adults and peers in the classroom. We want to make sure that every activity has a clearly structured routine that not only is developed, but that it's accessible to students in a written format with picture supports, hopefully, and that's a routine that I teach and I reteach. I provide systematic feedback over time for students to ensure that that routine is being successfully learned and maintained over time. When I implement routines within my classroom, I'm going to increase or maximize my instructional time, increase predictability for students and for us, increase those on-task behavior, and decrease the amount of disruptions to instruction. Active supervision is another fantastic practice that we can put in place to help support our structure and predictability for students. And there is a separate presentation on active supervision that goes much deeper into the content. So if you'd like to know more about active supervision, please check that one out on our website. Active supervision in a nutshell is looking at the adults in the classroom supervising student learning by moving around the classroom, scanning what's happening, and interacting with students in a positive and proactive way about their engagement in the learning and in their interactions with peers. So the focus on positive and lots of movement to monitor student work. When we use active supervision, we decrease the amount of disruptions that happen in their classroom and really start building some positive rapport and feedback opportunities, which are one of the key ways to change outcomes for students with disabilities so that they have more positive outcomes. The next thing we're going to be looking at is promoting that positive classroom environment. So these three strategies will really help us promote that positive classroom environment if we set clear expectations and rules. Ideally, we're setting those across our building, across our grade level, across all settings, so that students know the very clear expectations for what they should be doing. Expectations like be safe, be responsible, be respectful, be a leader. Those are some broad expectations that students can follow. But within those broad expectations, we need very concrete and specific rules and procedures that students can follow. Those should be observable and measurable. Students should be able to clearly see what they are expected to do. When we implement those clear expectations and rules that are maintained across all settings, we're going to really increase the student's ability to follow the expectations. We see increased positive social skills and pro-social behaviors and a decrease to the disruptions in our classroom. The next practice that we can implement is behavior-specific praise, where we're really targeting those behaviors that we want to see more of in the classroom. We want students to engage in small group work. We want them to start their work when we give the direction and finish the entire task. We want them to use kind words with peers. Then we are going to provide that behavior-specific praise. Some of us use the term catch them being good, but we're definitely giving clear statements of approval. We're identifying who we are praising and specifically what we are praising so that students can repeat that over time. We want to make sure that our behavior-specific praise is age-appropriate and peer-appropriate, and that we're praising students in a way that they want to be praised. So if a student really likes verbal praise in front of peers, we're doing that. If a student just wants a thumbs up to know they're on track, that we're doing that. If they want written feedback, we're providing that. But making sure that behavior-specific praise is very clear to students that something they specifically did is causing us to say, I like the way you are, and then fill in the blank. Some of our students do best with a token economy, where we're delivering tokens or classroom dollars or some kind of a tangible that is contingent or based upon the behavior a student is exhibiting. Keep in mind that token economies are what we call backup reinforcers. So we're trying to reinforce that desirable behavior, and specifically using that when just verbal praise or a thumbs up isn't enough to encourage a student to engage in that behavior. Not all students need a token economy or want a token economy to engage in appropriate behavior, but for those students for which verbal praise or a thumbs up aren't enough, then we might want to consider that next step of adding a system like a token economy. We've got two other practices or strategies we're going to chat about here, and these practices also have separate presentations that you can check out if you want to dig deeper into these topics. So when we look at the concept of what we call non-contingent reinforcement, this is just that positive reinforcement that's not tied to a particular behavior, but rather we're using this to build positive relationships with students by just positively praising them throughout the day for all kinds of different things that they might be doing. And this can be following those overall general expectations, like being a leader and being respectful, but we're giving that praise, not contingent to just a specific behavior that we're targeting for that student. We also might want to look at high probability response sequence. This one has a fancy name, but it's a really simple practice for a lot of us in that we want a student to engage in a task for which they might not want to do that. It's a task that they consider to be hard or something that they don't want to do. Well, for some students, if we get them on a roll of doing what we've asked, then they're more likely to do that task that they don't really like. So can you pick up your paper, or put your name on your paper, those tasks that they were very likely to do. Then when you say, hey, can you solve the first problem, because they've already said yes and yes, they're more likely to say yes again. There are several effective strategies that we can use to help students master and learn social and academic skills. So the four that we're going to talk about on this slide are specifically explicit instruction. And if this isn't something you've spent a lot of time with, Anita Archer has a fantastic website devoted to her life work in explicit instruction, but definitely something you want to dive deeper into. So with explicit instruction, we're acknowledging the fact that students with disabilities and all learners do best when they are clearly provided instructions for the task. So giving clear and consistent directions, clear and consistent steps to acquire a new skill. One of the main ways we think about explicit instruction often is when we're teaching students, we're using what we call that I do, we do, you do formula. So I do it first to show what the task is, we do it as a group, and then you do it independently. Explicit instruction has a lot of research behind it across multiple settings and is often called direct instruction. So those two are the same concept, explicit or direct instruction. The next one, opportunities to respond, makes a significant difference for students' academic engagement and their achievement, in addition to decreasing disruptive behaviors, and is as simple as giving students many more opportunities to engage in that academic learning. We use this one in conjunction with our teaching, so explicit instruction, and it needs to be scattered throughout a lesson, not clustered just at the end of a lesson, but giving students those multiple opportunities to respond in a variety of ways. The next strategy we can use is called performance feedback, where we're just clearly and consistently communicating with students how accurate or correct their performance was on a task, and then clarifying, providing correct information for any misunderstandings or incorrect answers they might have, ensuring that not only the answer on a problem is correct, but that the students have that background knowledge or schema in order to be able to replicate solving a problem or writing a sentence or engaging in a task again. The other concept that we can use with great success is called pre-correction, which means if I anticipate a problem might happen, I'm going to pre-correct it. Or in other words, I'm going to provide some explicit instruction on what I want to happen. So if I know that kids are going to leave my classroom and run in the hall, and they have a history of that, I'm going to pre-correct it by standing at the door and saying to my students, okay, everybody, I'd like to line up. Let's review the expectations for hallway behavior. And I'm either going to explicitly teach it and model it, or I'm going to ask students to tell me, remind me, what is the expectation for our hallway behavior? And have students share that with me. The last strategy we're going to look at in this section is called Instructional Choice, and this is giving students at least 2 or more options, a different way to do something. So for example, do you want to use a red pen or a blue pen? Do you want to start at the top of the paper or the bottom of the paper? Do you want to write your answer or say it to me out loud? The final structure we're going to look at in our overview of behavior supports we can provide for students is looking at the assessment and database decision-making process. So we want to make sure that we have a very clear practice in place for database decision-making. It should be systematic and allow us to quickly collect and analyze both formative data and summative data. So throughout the lesson, every day I should be collecting data to see how a student is doing. And then at the end of a lesson, a unit, a group of instruction, a time of year, I want to go back and say, is that material learned? Has it been retained? And is the student able to apply it or generalize it across other settings? We definitely want to match our interventions to student need. We also need to match the data-based process that we are using, the tools that we are using, and so that it matches the type of data we need to collect. We also want to make sure that we are screening and progress monitoring on a consistent basis, making sure that the data we have is both valid or correct and it's reliable over time. So that if I'm in a classroom collecting data and another person comes in and collects data on a different day, that we're doing that in the same way, looking at the same behaviors. We also want to consider that functional behavioral assessments, or FBA, are a key way to analyze a student's behavior if I don't know why it is happening. So anytime I'm not sure why a behavior is happening in a classroom, then I want to consider if an FBA would be needed. Keep in mind that in order to complete an FBA for a student, we must have parent permission, and for students with disabilities, that must happen within the ARC meeting, but definitely is a tool that we should consider for our students. There are lots of key resources that you can access in addition to KDE's website, which has all kinds of great tools that you can use for teaching and supporting students with emotional behavioral disabilities. PBIS has some fantastic resources at the Midwest PBIS website, and these websites are hyperlinked into this presentation. So when you click on them, you should be able to access those websites. The IRS Center has fantastic modules and website information and case studies that you can use to ensure your understanding of topics that you would like to dig deeper into. And if you're looking for specific resources, if you check out the IRS Resource Locator, you'll see there are tons and tons of resources. For example, we're looking at the behavior and classroom management resources, and there are 107 right now in the IRS modules. In addition, the University of Louisville, through their ABRI Center, has great resources to support our students that are exhibiting either acting out or internalizing behaviors in the classroom. And the What Works Clearinghouse has great practice guides that synthesize the research and tell us how much evidence is in with strategies. For example, I'm showing you all the reducing problem behaviors in elementary school classrooms. And again, these are linked into the notes. Some great professional organizations that we can work with to really deepen our learning. In addition to the Council for Exceptional Children, we can be part of the Behavioral Disorders Division or the Early Childhood Division, or the Association of Positive Behavior Supports is another group we can look at. If you're viewing this video as part of our NKCES summer overview trainings, then make sure that you head back into your email, check out the resources that are in the Google Doc you received, and don't forget to take the quiz at the end so that you earn credit for your time. Thanks so much for joining us. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or check our NKCES website for upcoming trainings that you can join.